All right, team. Are we ready to go? We got to make up a little time. It's 4:21. We were supposed to start at 4:15, so we're going to burn some time. It's nice to see everybody. Thank you for coming for our afternoon session. To begin this session, let me introduce the president of the National League of Cities, Mayor Mark Stodola, from the great city of Little Rock, the great state of Arkansas, close enough to Louisiana to be comfortable. Mark is also a member of the Conference of Mayors Advisory Board and a longtime leader in our organization. I'm very proud of the partnership our conference has had with the National League of Cities on priorities like CDBG and tax reform. And I know that under Mark Stodola's leadership, our work together will continue to grow. I also like to recognize NLC CEO and Executive Director Clarence Anthony, who is a great partner for us and works very closely with our CEO and Executive Director, Tom Cochran. For more on our work together, please welcome Little Rock Mayor Mark Stodola.
Well, thank you, Mayor Landrieu. It's great to be with you, and it's great to be with all of my friends here in D.C. as we learn about infrastructure in the 21st century from a new administration. You know, the National League of Cities is very proud to work very closely in partnership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors and has for many, many years, and on so many important issues, and certainly it's a very important time for us to bind together. So from preserving tax exemptions to CDBG, to preserving tax exemption on municipal bonds, trying to save the elimination of SALT, to all of the myriad of things that we work together on. Working together makes us both stronger. And I want to thank Mayor Landrieu for his leadership at such an important time for cities. You know, in our rapidly changing political environment, his call for progress over partisanship is so very, very important, and it's really put a spotlight on the issue of leadership, particularly local leadership that delivers results. And so, you know, where Washington has failed to act, cities have had no choice but to lead, and certainly I know that all of us are doing that. As mayor, I know you can't do it alone, though, and so Mayor Landrieu is supported by an amazing leadership team as well, and I want to thank and recognize his great support team, Mayor Steve Benjamin, Mayor Brian Barnett, and of course, the indefatigable Tom Cochran. The indefatigable Tom Cochran. Look it up. This year, the National League of Cities is calling on Congress seriously to prioritize the passing of an infrastructure package that invests in our cities and in our future. We're asking for that federal partnership with a concept at the National League of Cities called Rebuild With Us, which is what we're calling our new infrastructure advocacy campaign. And so from bridges to broadband, infrastructure investments fuel our economy, they create jobs, and allow us to compete on the global stage. And I know that all of these investments are best made when local expertise and know-how is requested and listened to. So as mayors and local leaders, it's important for us to keep our voice raised very, very high. And we know what projects are best for our communities and how it'll transform us in terms of the future and the future of work for our city, for our cities and for our employees. So I hope you will join us when we call on Congress to rebuild with us and to invest in our local infrastructure. This is truly an investment in our future, and I'm happy to bring greetings from the National League of Cities, and I look forward to another great year of productive results in partnership. I'm particularly pleased to be able to be a part of this session as I have had the opportunity through the National League of Cities to co-chair a joint national task force on the opiate epidemic. And we have put out a prescription for change and a prescription to deal with this, and I hope that you'll have an opportunity after this session to take a look at that. It's an action toolkit to allow us as leaders of our cities to speak loudly and clearly and to promote the type of things that change is so very well needed as we talk about this opiate epidemic later on in this session. So thank you very much. It's great to see all of you again.
Mark, thank you so much. And Clarence, thank you for your partnership with our organization. It means a lot to us. We are better together. There's no question about that. I now would like to introduce my friend Jim Anderson. As head of government innovation programs for Bloomberg Philanthropies, Jim has worked hard to strengthen city halls across the country by spreading ideas and innovations that work. Jim is here today to make an important announcement about one of my favorite Bloomberg programs called What Works Cities. This program has helped change the way the city of New Orleans and many others make policy and programming to cities through the use of data. Please join me in welcoming Jim.
All right, good afternoon, mayors. Thank you so much, Mayor Landrieu, and thanks to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, especially Tom Cochran and Mayor Steve Benjamin. We really appreciate the chance to come and talk with you all today. Also want to recognize the National League of Cities President, Mayor Stodel. We've enjoyed the partnership with you over many years. So it's becoming a little bit of a tradition. Bloomberg Philanthropies coming to the U.S. Conference of Mayors. My boss, Mike Bloomberg, came here last June, where he announced the American Cities Initiative, which is a 3-year, $200 million investment in cities, in your capacity to innovate and your ability to advance critical policy issues that will change the course of our nation. And one of the cornerstones of the American Cities Initiative is What Works Cities. And this is our effort to help U.S. cities get lots better at using data and evidence to improve people's lives. What Works Cities began with a really simple insight. Mayors everywhere were telling us they wanted to use data in bigger ways, in more powerful ways, but it's hard to do. It's difficult to create a culture of using data in your daily work. In fact, here's a great statistic. Of the cities that we work with, 70% have developed portals or toolkits to share data with the public, but only 1 in 5 have developed the routines and the systems to pull data routinely to populate those portals and those tools. So there's a little bit of a gap between the ambition to use data and where the practice is. So What Works Cities was designed to close that gap. And we identified 5 world-class partners to fuel this initiative forward. They're here today: Results for America, GovX at Johns Hopkins University, the Sunlight Foundation, Harvard University, and the Behavioral Insights team. If folks could just wave your hands. You guys have been an amazing group of partners to accelerate this program over the last few years. We've also been able to partner with a lot of other organizations, including Clarence Anthony and the National League of Cities, which has really helped us accelerate these efforts. 2.5 years later, What Works Cities is more than just an initiative at Bloomberg. It really is a movement. 2 weeks ago, we hit a huge benchmark. 100 cities are now participating in this technical assistance and coaching program. But I think more importantly, we now have hundreds of city leaders from across the country that are better equipped and better connected, sharing ideas and learning from one another every single day. So data is not the sexiest thing in the world. It's probably not even the sexiest thing in your city halls. Very few of you have passionate constituencies that are constantly pushing you to improve the nuts and bolts of the way your government works, but we truly are passionate about this, and we share that passion with you. And the What Works Cities certification program is our effort to elevate and celebrate the cities that are really moving towards a high standard of data excellence. So today, I'm excited to announce the first 9 cities to receive the official What Works certification for proven leadership in data-driven government. So here we go. Silver certification goes to 8 cities. They are Boston, Kansas City, Missouri, Louisville, New Orleans, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, and our wonderful host city, Washington, D.C. And gold certification goes to 1 city, and that's Los Angeles, California. Will the mayors of these cities please join me on the stage? I heard that. Let's give them a big round of applause. I'll tell you all about it. A little on the stage debate about LA coming out on top. All right, so Mayor Muriel Bowser, Mayor Marty Walsh, Mayor Sly James, Mayor Eric Garcetti, Mayor Greg Fisher, Mayor Mitch Landrieu, and Kevin Faulconer, Bloomberg Philanthropies is so proud to stand with you and expand our partnership around using data to improve people's lives through What Works Cities. All of these cities All of these cities will receive additional supports from our What Works Cities partners to deepen their data and evidence excellence. Thank you. Okay. All right. So, let me just tell you very quickly about just a few highlights from some of these incredible cities and the work that they're doing. Boston and San Diego are using data to deliver services much more equitably across their great cities, improving and raising service quality for every single city resident. Louisville has fused performance management with innovation and empowered citizen scientists to contribute to these efforts. LA has excelled at using data to define problems, generate solutions, and manage for results in issues as diverse as cleaning streets to fighting climate change. In Kansas City and San Francisco, these leaders have found hugely new ways to increase transparency and give citizens a huge new voice in public service projects and decision-making. New Orleans has used used data to drive extraordinary decreases in very difficult issues such as blight remediation, while Seattle has used data to make incredible headway on its homeless problem. And here in Washington, D.C., and I love this, Mayor Bowser is rolling out new technologies in the crime fight and, really importantly, building evaluation in so that she can really see in real time if these new technologies are effective and equitable before she brings them to scale. So these mayors are leaders to watch. I've come to know them over the years. I'm so inspired by their passion, and they understand that when you're talking about data, you're really just talking about local government that understands what works and being able to double down on those things that really improve people's lives and move away from the stuff that is not paying out. So please, again, give them a round of applause. And because Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti just edged a little bit ahead of the rest of the pack, I'd like to invite him to give some closing comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim, so much. And because you haven't heard enough from me today, I'll be brief. Thank you, first of all, Mitch Landrieu, for this partnership and really being the incarnation. I have these brother and sister mayors who are my inspiration, and Mitch, you have been one of them. To Tom Cochrane, who is the longest-serving monarch in the Western Hemisphere since Queen Victoria, thank you for your great and continuous work. To all of the fellow cities that are part of this, you're extraordinary cities, and I love picking up the phone and talking to Kevin and being able to talk about homelessness or climate change down in San Diego, to be able to go out to dinner with Greg and discuss the future of art and culture and food in our cities. Muriel Bowser, who's done an amazing job. It is the hardest thing to host one of these things in your own city because she has a job full-time today of stuff that probably went down in D.C. that needed her attention. But thank you for all of that. Let me just say two things very briefly. In Los Angeles, we've been lucky the last 4.5 years. And I say the seed that was planted was when I got elected mayor, before I was sworn in, I took a trip to New York. And Jim, I was able to meet you and still then Mayor Bloomberg and looked at his infamous bullpen, look at the dashboard he had up on a screen, and it inspired me to try to lead with metrics, which I know is not a sexy line. It will never be a headline in any of our cities. But we all know that once you measure things, you can manage them. And when you count things, you can control them. And as mayors, that's all we want to do. Whether it was up here talking about doubling the number of girls that are playing in our parks, we didn't know that till we measured it. And we've received the #1 open data city for 3 years, the #1 digital city 3 out of 4 years. And let's continue to measure things, let's continue to protect things, and let's continue to make sure we apply things through data. We have every single person in Los Angeles owning this, from the guy who drives the trash truck and now looks and puts a 1, 2, or 3 based on that block as he goes by it so we know how clean it is, and somebody can pick up the phone and say, Mayor, why do I have a 3 on my block? That holds me accountable, so that the journalist and the press can say, hey, we looked at all your data, and did you know that it takes 3 times longer to pick up that trash in one part of town than another when the couch is left out? It makes us better mayors, and it makes us better leaders. So thank you to the What Works Cities Coalition. Thank you to Bloomberg Philanthropies for pushing this forward. There is no person giving more back as a private citizen to the mayors and the cities of this nation than Mike Bloomberg, and I want to thank him. Of all the things I've won, I know this, again, will not be leading the LA Times tomorrow, but this is the greatest award we have won, and thank you for not giving us platinum. We still got a long way to go. Thanks so much.
Mayor Garcetti, congratulations. And Jim, thank you for your work, and thank Mike Bloomberg. Mayors, really, if you can measure it, you can manage it. Mike Bloomberg is one of the first things he told me when I met him when I was a newly elected mayor, and it has worked out to be perfectly so. So we thank him for that, and thank him for his sponsorship. Now I'm going to call up Boston Mayor Marty Walsh to lead our next discussion on an issue that has touched each of us in personal ways, our families, our friends, our cities, in profound ways, and that is the issue of addiction and recovery. Just a few weeks ago, former Vice President Joe Biden joined Marty for his second inauguration as mayor of Boston. Biden said of Marty, and I quote, "This is a man of extraordinary character and courage, and there isn't a phony bone in his body." He has brought that courage and character to the conference as we have engaged in the difficult and detailed discussions about the opioid crisis in our cities. As co-chair of the Substance Abuse Prevention and Recovery Services Task Force, he has given us direction and focus on this important issue. He has brought practical ideas and resources to the table, like the Narcan demonstration last June and the mayor's toolkit his staff created to share lessons learned among mayors. And in Boston, Marty has created the nation's first municipal office of recovery services to prevent and treat substance abuse. Now, earlier we were talking about what motivates people, and sometimes it's a common vision and sometimes it's a common enemy. Katrina, Rita, Ike, Gustav, national recession, BP oil spill, floods. When we have common threats, it focuses your attention, and there's none that has focused the nation's attention more acutely than the opioid crisis, because all of us have been touched so personally and so deeply by this. And I don't think that there's a person in America who understands this, who's invested more, who's suffered more, and who's had the courage and the integrity to lead by example. So please help me welcome Boston Mayor Marty Walsh to the stage.
Thank you very much, Mitch, and I want to thank you for making substance abuse disorder and opioid epidemic a priority at this conference. 2 years ago, we created a task force on substance abuse prevention and recovery. The first meeting we had 12 or 13 mayors at it. Last year, we filled the room with about 30 people, and today we had another well-attended task force meeting, and now we have a session to talk about the issue. I'm grateful for the growth and the progress, but I'm not surprised, as Mitch just spoke about, this epidemic hitting us all. Substance abuse disorder is hitting every city we serve. It's harming every neighborhood, every town, every rural community in the United States of America. It's hurting every single one of our families, and it hurts people in this room. I took what I hope was my last drink in April of 1995. My story is uncommon, it's the same as what people are experiencing today. I ended up going to treatment. My first night in treatment, I was asked to describe what an alcoholic is, or a drug addict. And my response was, a person who lives on the street, who drinks out of a brown paper bag, a homeless person, a person that people we walk by. I soon learned better than that. The face of addiction wasn't that person whose life seemed so far removed from mine. The face of addiction was the face in the mirror. It was me. And I was no better than the person on the streets. The recovery model that worked for me started with a conversation between two men over 60 years ago. They set aside the shame and the stigma long enough to make the connection to their shared burden. Recovery has evolved since then. It takes a full continuum of care, backed by evidence-based practices and strong social supports for someone to reclaim their life. But fundamentally, that identification with a suffering person's humanity remains at the core. As addiction took hold through different substances and hit different communities, we sometimes have lost sight of that. But whether it's a powder or a rocks, needles or pills, black tar, heroin coming across our border, or painkillers made from the most advanced labs in the world right here in the United States of America, dangerous combination of drugs, or just plain alcohol. The point is, whatever the substance, it's the disease that takes over people's lives. Whether it's crack, meth, or opioids, they don't stop being the person, and they never did. They are and have always been our sons and our daughters, our sisters and brothers, our moms and our dads. Not some other kind of person, but people like us, people in this room. I just want to ask by a show of hands, how many people in this room have dealt with addiction in your own family? Now look around. It's not them, it's us. It's all of us. Addiction isn't a Democratic disease. Addiction isn't a Republican disease. It's not an independent disease. It doesn't hit conservatives more, or liberals more, or moderates more. It doesn't care if you're an artist or if you're an accountant. It doesn't care if you're an Eagles fan or a Patriots fan. Addiction doesn't care about any of that. It's a disease of human beings. But in its cruelty, it exposes one truth we need to beat it, and that we're all equally human. And if each of us can relate to each other on that basis and see our own humanity reflected in others, then we have a chance, not just to help the individual recovery, but to come together as communities and as a nation to bring hope, save lives, and beat back this epidemic. That's why this stigma is all around all of us. And addiction can kill because it blinds us to the truth. It stops people from getting help, and it stops people from giving help. I felt it recently when I announced the plan in Boston to build a comprehensive long-term recovery campus on a beautiful island in the Boston Harbor. Our community providers and impacted families could not be more supportive. But what I have to do to get to that island is build a bridge. And there are some people, even as an island in the Boston Harbor is too close for them to have these addicts there. The fear and the stigma is that strong. We're going to get it done. But appropriately enough, the first thing we have to do is rebuild the bridge. And that bridge isn't just a physical bridge, it's a bridge to the community to explain to them what we have to do. We have to remind folks what's at stake, not just for the people that they're seeing on the streets, but for their own families and their own neighbors. Stigma separates us from each other, but empathy brings us together and makes us stronger. That's the lesson I learned almost 23 years ago. It's what gets an individual on the road to recovery, and it's what gets us, a society, on the road to stemming the epidemic and ending the suffering. That road we started down at this conference, I want to thank a few people. I want to thank Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake for helping us launch this work when she was the president. I want to thank Mick Cornett. I want to thank Mick Cornett for supporting us last year and keeping this work moving forward. I want to thank again my friend Mitch Landrieu for elevating this issue to this stage today. And I want to thank my co-chair, Mayor Nan Whaley, for her leadership on this issue and on our task force. I want to thank the mayors who have joined this conversation, who are not afraid to break the stigma and move us forward, both here and at home. I urge everyone to add your voices. Addiction has touched all of us and all of our families, and certainly has touched all of our constituents. Our platforms as elected leaders are compassion and friends and family, but first and foremost, our humanity. I want to thank you all for being here today. And now I have the honor, I think, of bringing Nan Whaley up here. I don't know if Nan's in the room yet, but I want Nan to come up here if you're here. Nan, come on up. Are you introducing the panel?
You're on the panel.
I know, okay, thank you. Thank you.
And then
Thank you.
sit right next to me, Mayor. Also, the other panelists, if they're in the room, if they'd come on up, Sam and Dr. Murthy. Sam, you can leave your bag with Crystal. No one here will take it. Right? I don't think. Well, I want to thank Mayor Walsh for his great leadership and his passion on this issue. It's an honor to get to work with him and work on as the co-chair of the Substance Abuse Task Force. And it's also an honor to see the number of mayors that are engaging in this issue for their communities. As Marty mentioned, our nation is in the midst of one of the great addiction crises of our age. The opioid epidemic is claiming nearly 90 lives every single day, with countless more overdose, and thanks to our emergency services and police women and men, and a drug called Narcan, many more deaths are being averted. Our problems, as Mayor Walsh alluded, are not just opioids, but also alcohol and suicide and other drugs. In 2015, more than 127,500 people died from drugs, alcohol, and suicide. And in 2025, that number is expected to rise to 192,000 that year. Joining me today to discuss with us not just this country's opioid epidemic, but also the addiction crisis are Sam Quinones and Dr. Vivek Murthy. Please welcome them. Now, I have to be honest, Dr. Quinones is, Sam Quinones is the reason actually why the city of Dayton went and pursued to sue the drug companies to hold them accountable. About 3 years ago, I read his book, Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opioid Epidemic. It was something that could really make me see what is happening in my community in a more broader sense and bring it right home. And it emboldened me to take great action. And so I think that's happened to many people as I've gotten active in this work. Your book is making a great difference. And you should have all received a copy of the book at registration. Following this session, Sam says that he'd be happy to sign the books and his great work as a reporter at the LA Times for 10 years and has spent 10 years before that as a freelance journalist in Mexico, so has a lot of experience with this effort. And Dr. Vivek Murthy, we're glad to see you here again. Actually, he has served as the 19th Surgeon General of the United States between 2014 and 2017. He launched the Turn the Tide campaign in 2016, urging health professionals to join a movement to address our nation's opioid crisis. He also issued the first Surgeon General's report on alcohol, drugs, and health, in which he called the nation to expand access to prevention and treatment and to recognize addiction as a chronic illness, not a character flaw. And I'd say a few years ago, Marty and I were sitting next to each other and you came to speak, and that was something also that was transformative to us in this work. So we're very happy to have you. So I'd like to give you all just an opportunity to give some opening remarks for 1 to 2 minutes to tell us why you think America is facing such an addiction crisis at this moment. Dr. Murthy.
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me here. It's such an honor to be back. When I was in office, we used to look through the list of conferences we've been invited to, and we always loved coming to this conference because I have found that mayors are people who can't afford to be stuck, pontificating about issues. They actually are the ones who put their shoulder to the wheel and who actually get things done. And it's such an honor and pleasure to be with all of you once again. This issue of addiction that we are all struggling with in America, and truly that many other nations are struggling with, is one that does not have one simple solution because it does not have one simple cause. Unlike an infectious disease, we can't trace this to a specific bacteria or virus. This is a problem that came over the years through a combination of circumstances that involved, number one, an overprescribing of opioid medications by doctors, and involved heavy marketing of these opioid medications to doctors and to the public by pharmaceutical companies. It also coincided with the lack of treatment that we had. And all of that was taking place in the background of a terrible stigma around addiction, which prevented people from even admitting that they had a problem. But I think that one thing I'm hoping that we can touch on, pardon me, in our discussion later today is a deeper question of what is addiction a response to? And what I think we have to recognize is that for many people who are struggling with addiction, they're dealing with a deeper pain. And it's not just a physical pain, it's often a deeper emotional pain. And the truth is that there are millions of people all across America, including young people, older people, and middle-aged Americans, who are experiencing a tremendous amount of chronic stress and deep emotional pain. And when people are in pain, they seek to relieve that pain in some way. That's what we all do. That's human nature. Some of us may relieve it by hanging out with friends. Some of us may relieve that stress and that pain by going out to dinner with a friend. Some of us may have a drink, and some of us may use drugs. Some of us immerse ourselves in work. And the truth is there are healthy and also unhealthy ways of dealing with pain. But when you look at it, what's happened is that we, in addition to having the availability of these drugs, I think we have to ask ourselves a deeper question. What is driving the deeper pain that people are experiencing across America? And I think if we don't address that, we will just see a different topic, next year. It may not be opioids, it may be something else that people turn to, but whether it's drugs, whether it's violence, whether it's other sort of unhealthy behaviors, we've got to ask ourselves where that's coming from, and that's one of the things I'm hoping we can talk about today.
Yeah, we look forward to getting into that, Dr. Murthy.
Yes, thank you all very much. This is another surreal event in my life in the last 3 years. I'm normally interviewing guys with tears tattooed on their faces, and so I don't think you guys have any of those, so that's good. Very different experience. Anyway, I would agree with Dr. Murthy on all this. It has to do also with the fact that we now have a very, very potent source of drugs on our border, and that's Mexico. The traffickers down there are very, very adept at what they do. They've been able to produce enormous quantities of very, very cheap, very potent drugs. This is kind of the supply side of this. I believe that this is really a supply-generated problem. Demand comes after that, and then it's hard to separate it out, but I do believe that what started it was supply, pills in this case, but then also the supply coming from Mexico, which is why it's so deadly these days, the heroin and the fentanyl. But I believe also this, as I got into the book that I wrote, I thought I was writing a great drug trafficking book, kind of just about drug trafficking, and it turned out I thought that it was really something, there was also something much deeper that I think Dr. Murthy touched on right now, which is to say that we have spent a long time in this country destroying community in a variety of ways. And of course, you can point to the Rust Belt and Appalachia as certain areas where this has taken place. But I think this has actually gone on in many areas, including wealthy areas. In Los Angeles, I think our Southern California, our heroin belt beltway is Orange County. It's Simi Valley and Thousand Oaks and Moore Park, and it's very, very nice communities. And so I believe that we've got that there are these deeper issues, and that they do lead to addiction, and in particular this problem, that make it again complicated to deal with, but also I think give us. I tend to view this, frankly, as an opportunity, as a great possibility for the country, because it is, as you, Mayor Walsh, I believe, were just saying, an issue that does almost the only issue on the landscape of American public discourse today that does not polarize. It brings people together precisely because I think what you were saying is that there's very few groups, political or otherwise, that are not affected by this. And so I think that is also part of this story as well. It's got the potential, an enormous potential, I think, for great achievement, and with cities, counties, states leading the way. I believe Washington has an enormous role to play in facilitating it, but I do believe that most of the response and the innovation will come from the local level.
Thank you.
Just real quick, I think that I agree with mostly everything I heard up here today so far. I think I got elected to the House of Representatives in 1997. When I got to the House of Representatives, we were underfunding recovery programs. We had, in my opinion, an epidemic in 1997. I know they officially deemed it an epidemic sometime in 2000, but we had the issues of drugs and addiction going on and alcoholism going on. We didn't have enough detox beds. We didn't have enough long-term recovery beds. We didn't have a continuum of service. When I got into treatment, I learned about the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction, and oftentimes they say it's hereditary. The one issue I'll push back a little bit on up here is that I don't think for all people there's a deeper feeling. I think prescription drugs changed the game. I think prescription drugs won across America, where you had people that didn't have addictive families and didn't have any addiction in their family, and they started taking a pill, and next thing they're putting a needle in their arm because they ran out of money. And I think that the issue in front of us is we have to continue to address it. I said it in the task force meeting the other day. People and mayors and governors are trying to talk about the numbers going down. I don't believe that for 1 second. I think we have to continue this fight, and I think we have to continue education because we have a generation of young people that don't understand what prescription drugs are yet. And I think that, suing pharmaceutical companies is important to do. I think making people aware is important to do. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to education. We have the opportunity as mayors to educate. The people that raised your hand in this room a minute ago, you know firsthand. You know from the beginning of that person's life in your family, when they were playing sports or they were hanging out, and you know whether they're in the grips of addiction today or if they're no longer with us, you know that what happened. And it's important for us to take this information and pass it along the country.
Great comments. So Dr. Murthy, when you recently wrote in the Harvard Business Review that you were talking about, I think, what you called the loneliness epidemic, and you kind of said this in your opening comments a bit, and I think Mayor Walsh might disagree a little bit, which is good. Can you talk a little more about what you're talking about there and why that's making such an impact on addiction today?
Sure. Well, I think that, whether you are, wherever you are in the path, of dealing with your substance use disorder, your community is a really important factor. It's very hard to go through substance use disorders and get into recovery and stay in recovery completely alone. You usually need somebody there to support you, whether that's one person or whether it's a group of people. But that community is really important. And the reason I wrote about loneliness recently was because I had been just reflecting on some of my own experiences practicing medicine. And I'm an internal medicine doctor, so I see adult patients with, and I thought, going into internal medicine, the most common illnesses I would see would be heart disease and diabetes and infections and cancer. But I started realizing that the most common condition that my patients were dealing with was actually loneliness. They were not coming forward and saying, the first thing they took in the room, hey, I'm lonely. But it was coming out later, sometimes in the second visit or the third visit, often when asked about it. And there has been a growing body of science looking at the health impacts of loneliness. And before it wasn't something we really thought of as as the domain of a doctor or nurse to think about, or anyone outside the family to think about. But the truth is, if you look at people who are experiencing chronic loneliness, they actually live shorter lives. In fact, the mortality impact of loneliness is similar to the mortality impact of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's greater than the mortality impact of obesity. And it involves a higher risk of heart disease, of depression, of anxiety, of dementia, and a host of other chronic illnesses. There are biological reasons for this, as it turns out. It turns out that because we've evolved to be social beings, and social beings doesn't mean we're all extroverts. And I say this as somebody who is an introvert myself. But we all need some degree of social connection, and we evolved that way as a protective force. But when we are disconnected from other people for a long period of time, that actually puts our body in a physiologic stress state. And when you're in a stress state for a long period of time, that leads to higher degrees of inflammation, which in turn lead to many of the chronic illnesses that we're talking about. So I wrote about this because I was concerned that at a time when we are profoundly connected by technology, whether it's the ability to text or email or FaceTime or connect via social media, we are actually getting lonelier. So Gallup, in their poll, found that in the 1980s, about 20% of adults in America admitted to being lonely. That number is close to 40% today, despite the fact that we are so connected. So something is fundamentally wrong in how we are managing or prioritizing, I should say, our connections with each other. And my worry is that we have lost sight of just how valuable those relationships are. I say this as a doctor who has written prescriptions for many great medicines, antibiotics and others that have the potential to save lives. But how often do we teach medical students in school that one of the most powerful things that they can do to contribute to someone's healing is to help them develop strong relationships with their healthcare provider and others? So this is why I think loneliness is a really powerful and important force to deal with now. And I think it plays into the larger addiction crisis we have, because there are far too many people who are struggling with addiction who feel like they can't come forward and talk about it because of the stigma, who don't have a community to deal with, to support them in their recovery. And that has real consequences. We're used to talking about medication-assisted treatment, like buprenorphine and methadone, which are really powerful for opioid addiction. But the key is MAT is medication-assisted treatment. It's not the medicine alone that does everything. It is actually the relationship and the work you're doing with your therapist, the relationships you have with a community of support that are an integral part of healing.
So just to follow up, you kind of think that the loneliness epidemic is really making it difficult for people to deal with addiction then. So when they come and recognize they have a problem, there's not the support that they can really have to be able to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's making it harder for us to help people get through the process of recovery. And I think for some people, it's even contributing to what leads them down the path of addiction. I mean, I think Mayor Walsh is right. There are many paths through which people come to addiction, right? And we have, as Sam mentioned, a tremendous increase in supply, if you will. People weren't getting prescribed the kind of opioids 20 years ago that they are now. And we know that about 40% of your likelihood of developing addiction is based on your genetics. And so, you give 10 people, the same dose of opioids, some will get addicted and some won't. But when I was in med school, we were taught that as long as somebody had legitimate pain, you could write them scripts for opioid medications and they would not get addicted. And gosh, now we look back on that, we feel foolish. I mean, it was absolutely wrong.
Right.
But just 2 years ago, I was in Florida visiting a friend who's a cardiologist, and I said to him, can you imagine we were taught that in med school? And he put down his fork and he said, wait, you mean that's not true? So even today, we have doctors who have not received the message about how dangerous opioids are and how we have to change our prescribing.
Wow. So Marty, you've made this, addiction issues the cornerstone of your administration, which you talked about so eloquently earlier. What is the one thing you're most proud of that Boston has done under your leadership, if you just had to choose one?
I don't think I could choose anything that we're proud of. I'm glad we've been able to do this. I think one of the things that through the Office of Recovery Services is looking at treatment in a whole different light and thinking about how do we have a continuum of care and how we continue to fight for that. I can't say I'm proud of it yet because I don't think that we have done enough in the battle of addiction in the country, in Boston, in the state of Massachusetts. I think as a legislator, I helped pass the prescription monitoring program when it wasn't popular, and the legislature just passed the doctors being educated in Harvard School of Medicine and all the doctors. I think that's good stuff. I can't say I'm proud yet because I don't think we haven't ended anything. There are still people every day getting addicted. There's still people every day losing family members. There are still people every day overdosing. I think the fact that, but more people are talking about it now, so I'm happy with that. I'm happy that our police department is doing follow-up cares to the homes of people who overdose. I'm happy that the fire department is showing up with drug counselors a couple days after. I'm happy that more people aren't resisting having Narcan in the police vehicles. I'm happy with that stuff, that people finally understand. I'm happy that the stigma of addiction is going away a little bit for people. I'm happy about that stuff, but I still think that I can't claim victory on anything we've done because I don't think that enough has been done to combat the epidemic that we're seeing on the streets of our city, our state, and our country.
And Sam, you've done two other books that are kind of very, very different from Dreamland. What compelled you to write Dreamland?
Well, I had lived in Mexico for 10 years. I came back from Mexico in 2004 to work for the LA Times, but before that I'd been in Mexico for 10 years. I'd written a lot about immigration, and I'd written a lot about, and at the Times I wrote a lot about drug trafficking. I wanted to understand, see, I'd never aspired to write a word about healthcare. I was a crime reporter. That's all I cared about. I just wanted to write about crime, immigration, that kind of stuff, border stuff. And I noticed that heroin traffickers from Mexico were doing banner business. And I could not understand that because I thought heroin was a drug that was kind of in the past. Like, who would really want to go back to that, and why? And so that led me to, I began to poke around in that, try to find a story I could write, and that led me to the story of one town in Mexico, in the state of Nayarit, called Jalisco, and where everybody in this town has developed a business model for selling heroin, black tar heroin, like pizza, essentially, delivering it like pizza. And that fascinated me. That whole story fascinated me. And I was amazed to find that this one little town was supplying, a major supplier to parts of 20 states and mostly cities. They didn't go out into the rural areas too much. And so I wrote about that. I went down to the town, spent some time there, interviewed a lot of guys who were in prison. And meanwhile, as I was doing this, I began to realize I didn't understand what the reason was that there would be a demand for their heroin, particularly in states that I did not associate with heroin at all, like West Virginia. That's where I first found it. Huntington, West Virginia is where I first found those. And then it led me up to Columbus, which was where the dope was coming from. So as that went on, I began to realize, well, there's a bigger story behind this that I'm unaware of. I was in Mexico. I did not know a thing about this when I came back from Mexico. I didn't know what a Vicodin was or an OxyContin was. And I got into this story and I began to realize the bigger story is this change in pain management and the approach to treat all individuals with the pain, whatever pain form that pain takes, with the same, essentially the same pill, the same kind of drug, opiates. That was a big, for me, the Mexican side was not much of a learning curve. I'd written 2 books about the country, I lived there for a long time. It was the pain management side, and that in turn, of course, led me to, as I got into the book, that took the form of a story for the stories for the LA Times, and then I transformed that into a book later. It became a story. I realized the story was much larger, I think, touching on what Dr. Murthy just said, that it became a story about destruction of community in a lot of areas, and that's why I chose the pool in the town of Portsmouth, Ohio, which had been this massive, beautiful, gorgeous thing of football fields. It was the civic center. It was the babysitter. It was everything. It brought people together. Nobody thought they were poor. They were working class folks, manufacturing town at the time. But nobody really thought of themselves as that. They thought of themselves as middle class because there was ways of communing. People played in the streets until late at night on summer evenings, and all that stopped. The steel mill left, the shoe factories in town left, and eventually the people left, and Main Street emptied out, classic tale, and eventually they knocked down Dreamland Pool and they replaced it with a strip mall with an O'Reilly's Auto Parts store as the anchor. And to me, that is what has happened to a lot of parts of our country. It just kind of opened up and made the town vulnerable, not unlike, say, the Indians when Europeans arrived with smallpox. There was just no way of combating this scourge that was then just beginning when that pool went down. And so, but the story really began, and why I tend to focus. I don't think we can really understand this story without understanding the importance of Mexico and all this. And it's a very complicated, very controversial topic. But I do believe that this is also part of the story that's very hard. We would not have the fatalities that we had today without Mexico being part of it. So, so that's really, how it started with this one little town, which was last week in the news for having Jalisco Nayarit was in the news, and many people picked this story up. There was something like 33 bodies found and separate mass graves in the town because there's now a big war for the heroin control in that town going on right now. But basically it starts with me wanting to understand why on earth Mexican heroin traffickers would be selling more heroin than ever before, and in states like West Virginia or North Carolina or Ohio, when I didn't consider those were to be heroin states.
So,
Can I ask
yeah,
a question?
sure.
On that, I mean, just curious. So I didn't read the book, and I'm going to read the book. Heroin's being produced in Mexico.
Yes.
We have a pill epidemic in America.
Right.
The reason why the heroin is so appealing to people in America is because they can't afford to buy the pill anymore.
Yes, and they're all opiates. They're chemically very similar drugs.
So was there anything, if in your experience, was there anything that if heroin wasn't available, let's say heroin was shut down, what is that replacement? Because something was going to replace the drug.
Yeah, I'm not sure that, see, I don't believe we would have had the same heroin problem we have today if our supply of heroin was the same as, say, in the 1970s when they made all those movies, Serpico and French Connection. All that heroin was coming from the Far East. It was getting here very expensive and very weak. That's not an alternative to 150 milligram habit of OxyContin a day. That was very, very weak stuff. What happened was, really in the 1980s, unbeknownst to almost everybody except for the DEA, was that there was a massive shift in our heroin market that went from, and this was the years of the Colombians, right? And then the Mexicans weren't quite there yet, but they were getting there. They essentially began to export, along with the cocaine and everything else, heroin that after a while just simply outcompeted the heroin that came from the Far East through New York City. And so the heroin that they were bringing up was increasingly dropped in price, and the potency also rose substantially. And that is why lots of people began to die. Plus, what we also did, even with that, the market for heroin was really limited. First of all, in Mexico, nobody wants to traffic heroin. It's the disgusting drug in the eyes of most of those guys. They want to do cocaine, they want to do meth, that kind of stuff. Marijuana, of course, that gets them started. But all of a sudden, we awakened the immense capacity of the Mexican drug trafficking culture. I don't say cartels because it's far beyond cartels. And all of a sudden, they began to see that the market that they really didn't think was there and wasn't really there for many, many years, all of a sudden now had grown and was growing. And what's more, it was growing in areas that had money. Before the typical heroin market in any town you go to is people who are tapped out. They do not have money for this because they've been addicted to heroin for years and years. So now it's a whole new range and many, many, many more people and continuing. And they come up then with the idea that fentanyl is now a no-brainer for if you're in that world. Why? Why would you want to raise a plant and have some guy up in the mountains harvest it? You can just make it in your own backyard or in your warehouse. And that totally has changed the fentanyl has changed the heroin market in very diabolical ways, you know. But I think what would have been the alternative had there not been very potent and very cheap Mexican heroin when people were hitting 200 milligrams a day of OxyContin by the early 2000s? That's a very, very good question. What I think we're seeing now is the fourth stage. If you take pills, heroin, fentanyl, the fourth stage is now meth.
Meth, right.
And the reason for that is that made no sense to me as a crime reporter. I was like, why would people go from heroin, a narcotic, to meth, a stimulant? Well, gets to some of these things we've been talking about, that it's really, there's this kind of, people just want to get high. It doesn't really matter what's there. And the supply of meth from Mexico is tremendous, and it's also very well made, if you can call it that, very well made methamphetamine. All of this is I think what we're going to see now is a fourth stage. I've seen it in a few towns where I've been recently, West Virginia being one of them, where meth is now the next stage, and it helps with the withdrawals. It's just available I was in Orange County talking with a guy. He had his needle set up, and it had heroin and meth in the same needle. I don't know I've never heard of that happening. That's stunning. So to my mind, we got into this with the pill prescribing, massive pill prescribing, thinking we were in this little bubble, right? That like nothing else was going on around us that would affect us. And in fact, there were all these latent heroin traffickers in Mexico. Heroin is the easiest drug to traffic, except for fentanyl now, because you can make a lot of it in small amounts. You can cut it when you get to the destination. You can hide. Plus, you create a customer who has to buy your product every day, and so by the way, it's coming. All of that is coming through walls, right? No one's running across the desert with packs of heroin on their back. It's coming through very walled-off areas. Come to Tijuana, you'll see 2 walls, right? And it's coming through there because it's easy to traffic. This is the problem we get to when you get into opening up this Pandora's box of heroin. But anyway, that was a long answer to.
Thank you.
No, it was great. So what is the one thing on this issue, Dr. Murthy, that you think people are just getting wrong? That, there's lots of misconceptions, but what's the one piece that you would say is the either cities or communities or even legislators aren't getting right about the issue of addiction and particularly the opioid crisis?
Well, I think there's there's no one thing that everyone's getting wrong, and the truth is that there's a lot of good work that's being done. We've heard a lot about it today. You know, as a former Boston resident for 11 years, I'm very proud of what's happening in Boston, but there's a lot of great work happening in many cities around the country. There is one thorny issue, though, that I think we still continue to underestimate in terms of how much of a barrier it is to addressing this problem, and that is the ongoing stigma around not just addiction, but the treatments to addiction. So one of the things that really struck me and disturbed me when I was visiting communities as Surgeon General were the misconceptions around medication-assisted treatment, around MAT, which is treatment with methadone, buprenorphine, and with naltrexone. And in many communities, I heard from community members, from doctors, from elected leaders, that their concern was that if they get more of these MAT centers into their community, that they're just essentially condoning the use of opioids or giving people a way to continue their opioid addiction. They're substituting one opioid for another. And the thing is, this could not be further from the truth if you actually look at the data. Is MAT perfect? No. Do people go through MAT and then relapse? Yes. But if you care about reducing overdose deaths, if you care about reducing the transmission of HIV and hepatitis C, if you care about reducing crime, then it turns out MAT does that for people and for communities. And so if you want to use data to drive solutions, MAT has to be a part of that solution. But the misconceptions around it and the ongoing larger stigma around addiction prevent a lot of communities from accepting a treatment center. They prevent legislators from funding treatment centers. And they prevent a lot of doctors from even wanting to prescribe this life-saving treatment. And so the question is, how do we address that? You can't legislate this stigma away, right? There's no law you can pass around it. But this is where I think all of you as mayors have such a powerful role to play, because you are not just leaders when it comes to policies and programs. You are moral leaders in your community. And when people see you voicing your support for something like medication-assisted treatment, when they see you sharing your own personal stories or the stories of others in your community who are struggling with addiction, that has a profound impact, even if people don't always say it, in changing like how they think, or at least opening them up to think a bit differently. And I think this is where that leadership is more important now than ever before. I mean, to me, the addiction crisis is pulling back the curtain on a much deeper need we have for rethinking community and rethinking how we relate to each other. And we have a decision to make, like, as a country. Are we going to say that and truly believe in a fundamental American value that all lives do in fact matter and have value? Or are we going to say that only certain lives have value? That if you're diabetic, if you have high blood pressure, then that's a legitimate disease and you can get treatment. But if you're struggling with addiction, then somehow that's your fault. You're not worthy of treatment or resources. And and this is a real thing. All of us in this room may feel, of course, this is an issue we should put resources behind. But the idea that naloxone, which many of your communities are now, are now ensuring that first responders have, the idea that naloxone should be given to people who overdose is not a given belief among everyone in America. There are many communities I travel to where people say, well, maybe the first time, but the second time they overdose, no naloxone for them. People just got to learn the hard way. And that may seem harsh to you, but this is what many people still believe, including people who are writing and supporting laws in communities across America. So changing and eradicating the stigma around addiction, but also around MAT, is going to be absolutely essential. It's a foundation on which we ensure that we can get the resources we need, that we can get the community participation, and that we ultimately have the political will to marshal through solutions. Because this is not going to be a one-year battle. This is not a 5-year battle. This is a long-haul journey that we're on together. And we need to be in it together. We need to recognize it's a priority.
There's a saying that with every great crisis comes up an opportunity, and so this is definitely a crisis. Mayor Walsh, what do you think is the greatest opportunity for us in this epidemic?
It's a tough question. I think the greatest opportunity is that a lot of people, like-minded people, on the same page as far as finding solutions. And I think that, what the doc just said is kind of disheartening when you think about what heroin and what prescription drugs are doing to the entire country. And to have leaders still not understanding what that means. I think that's disheartening. But I think the positive thing here is that there's far more people talking about it today, people writing about it today, getting a history, getting understanding of it, and being able to disagree. I mean, if you asked me 5 years ago about assisted treatment, I was not a proponent of that. I was somebody who said, I went to detox, I didn't take a pill, and I got sober. I went to AA, and I still go to AA, and I got sober. You should be able to tough it out. And I've seen in cases where Suboxone and other drugs work. And he made a very interesting point that's important. It's assisted treatment. So the key of it is not just getting methadone treatment, because we're having a big battle in Boston now with a methadone provider, is that making sure that there's support services for that person that's on that addiction. And that has to happen. And I think it's much like the drug dealers who are making in that small town, getting it over the wall. There's a support staff there making it happen. So in order to combat that back, the person addicted needs that support back there. And I just want to clear one point up. I said earlier with the doc when he was talking about loneliness, when he was talking about what he wrote, I was talking about addiction today. Again, it goes back to the definition of alcoholic or drug addict. If you look at alcoholics and drug addicts, you will see a history of addiction in somebody's family. But pills change that.
Right.
And that's what I meant by the loneliness piece. It's kind of like the pills change that, and the person who doesn't have any addiction in the family at all of a sudden now has a son or daughter that's addicted to heroin because they started popping a pill. So I just want to clarify that piece there. I think that I think the greatest outcome for what can come out of this is to come up with a better system so with the next generation of young people aren't going through the same thing. We didn't say we lost a generation, but we lost a generation between mid-90s to 2013, 14, when we started paying attention. Some of the pharmaceutical companies still don't get it, even though they're getting sued. And I think that what we have to do is provide the next generation of young people that prescription drug issue. We have to work to make sure that they don't go down the same path that their brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles did the generation before.
Dr. Murthy, what do you think is our greatest opportunity here?
Well, I think that in our response to this crisis, we have an opportunity to become a kinder nation. And here's why I think this is so important, because we're a country that has been built on a narrative of rugged individualism. Right? We've been told that it is the individual achiever that has built America through their hard work, through their struggles, often on their own. And there's definitely truth to that. There's a strain to that. We celebrate great entrepreneurs in America. But our greatest moments of a country have been moments of collective achievement. Right? There wasn't one person who put a man on the moon, one person who won World War II, one person who started, led, and helped continue the civil rights movement. These were collective moments where people came together. But what we had to do in those moments and in those movements is we had to recognize that looking outside of ourselves and recognizing that our interests and our future and our well-being is connected to the future and well-being of others, that we had to do that we had to start recognizing our connection to each other and that we have to be invested in each other. And I think that is one of the things that this crisis is pushing us to do, is to recognize that the only way we're going to get beyond this is if we stop just looking out for ourselves and start recognizing that in the right circumstance, all of us could be susceptible. Any one of us could go to a doctor and get an inappropriate opioid prescription. Many of us, have family histories of addiction and could be susceptible ourselves. And so this is pushing us to think how we reach beyond our traditional silos with compassion and kindness, and recognize that we could all be vulnerable and we all have to stand up for and invest in those who are affected today and those who could be affected tomorrow. If we can do that, it will not only help us to address addiction, but that culture of compassion and kindness will help us to address so many of the other challenges we have today, not just in healthcare, but in educating our kids and ensuring that we are helping small businesses to grow and helping to ensure that we have an environment that supports healthy dialogue. I rarely ever meet somebody in our country who is happy with the state of political dialogue. And if any of you are, I'd love to meet you because you're a rarity. But the truth is many citizens in our country feel that dialogue in our country has gotten toxic, that people have forgotten how to talk to each other. And that's what fundamentally happens when we become disconnected. That's why I think that rethinking how we connect with each other, using this as an opportunity to rebuild those fundamental connections is so important, because it is our connection with each other that's the foundation on which everything else is built, whether it's our economic prosperity, the health and well-being of our children, or any other dreams that we want to pursue. So that's where I think we can go. I actually feel optimistic about this, despite the challenges we have, because we have people, Mayor Walsh is one of them, but there are many others, including our Mayor of Anaheim, Mayor Tate, and others who recognize the power of approaching this crisis with compassion. I've always said to the medical students and residents I've trained that we get trained in a whole lot of fancy drugs and how to use a whole lot of new medical technologies. And those are exciting and interesting, and they save lives. But we forget sometimes that love and compassion are the oldest medicines that we have. Their power to heal and to strengthen people is unimaginable. It's extraordinary, and that's been true throughout history. And we forget that at our peril. It's why community is such an important part of recovery, but it's also part of the armor that protects us from all kinds of struggles, whether it's around addiction, whether it's infection, whether it's violence, whatever it might be. So my hope is coming out of this so we can emerge a kinder, a more compassionate, a more loving country that recognizes the importance of our connection to each other and prioritizes that.
Sam, you get the last word. What do you think is our greatest opportunity?
I would agree with a lot of that, and in fact, I think what's happening is you're seeing some of this take place around the country. I think every county I go to seems to have a task force in which they're bringing together people who never thought maybe they would be part of this fight, in a sense. Clergy, Chamber of Commerce is a business story, absolutely. A lot of counties can't find enough people to pass a drug test to fill the jobs that they have over here. I do believe that this is an enormous opportunity. I was testifying in the Senate, another surreal moment in my life, a couple of weeks ago. And I said, it seems to me that this is a great time to look to the communities, the places in this country who have not fared so well in globalization or with free trade, and reach out to them and make them feel part of the country anymore, because evidently they do not feel part of the country. And along with that, I believe that for example, research in Boston and other parts of the country has been an enormous economic boon to different places. I believe there's an enormous role for research grants to help study addiction in maybe areas of southern Ohio or eastern Kentucky or parts of southern Indiana or wherever. But also along with that comes an enormous potential for economic development, seems to me. I wrote an op-ed to that effect in the Lexington Herald a couple of years ago, that I thought that this was because what we have now is actually an amazing opportunity. We have so many recovering addicts. They're all going back to college to be social workers and drug counselors, and they don't have any place to work. They don't have any place to channel that immense energy that they now have now that they're no longer using dope. It's fantastic to see that, and it seems a shame to waste that raw material. I believe that we have an opportunity to change criminal justice. In fact, I think law enforcement is actually fairly well ahead of the curve in many areas. One thing I've seen in Kentucky that is magnificent, I think it's a radical idea but beautiful, is the way that jail has been transformed. Jail is no longer no longer a place to vegetate. Instead, it's a place to begin recovery. You opt in as an inmate, and you spend the rest of your day, you're not arguing about stupid stuff, you're not fighting, you're not bartering, you're working on recovery, so that all of a sudden, for the next drug problem we have, jail becomes an asset and no longer a liability, which in my experience it has always been. And still very often is all across the country. I find what's going on in Kentucky and some other areas to be truly radical and fascinating. And of course it's not that everybody goes through these pods, these recovery pods, and comes out a changed person. But there's enormous opportunity to change law enforcement, to change the way we view addiction, but also to change the economic underpinnings of community destruction that have gone on for a variety of many years, and due to a number of forces that are well beyond those communities' ability to change. So this is, because it's the kind of issue that brings people together from all walks, all different political viewpoints, it leads me to believe that it's one that also has enormous opportunity for changing the underpinnings that we've talked about up here to this whole epidemic.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate all your discussion. It was a great conversation. Can you give our panelists a round of applause? Thank you.
I want to thank Nan and Marty and our guests for this fantastic and informative discussion around such an important issue. I'm going to give the final word, and then we're going to wrap up here, to our partner, David Thompson, who works with the U.S. Communities Program. Many of you know that the U.S. Conference of Mayors is a proud sponsor of the U.S. Communities Cooperative Purchasing Program. It's the leading national government purchasing cooperative providing world-class government procurement resources to local government, school districts, and nonprofits looking for the best overall supplier government pricing. This program was founded in 1996 in partnership between NACO and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and since then we've welcomed the NLC, the Association of School Board Officials, and the NGA as national sponsors. So U.S. Communities allows your cities, your schools, and nonprofits to save time, administrative costs, and receive the best price available. Today, there are more than 55,000 registered users taking advantage of this fantastic program, purchases more than $2 billion in products and services annually. Here to give you a quick update is David Thompson, who works with the program. Please. Thank you.
Konnichiwa, y'all. I'm actually bilingual. I worked as a county manager in North Carolina for 20 years, and my mother's Japanese. So if I lose you and you don't understand Southern or Japanese, just raise your hand and I'll try to clarify. But anyway, we just had an outstanding year at U.S. Communities. We had actually budgeted revenue of $2.3 billion, and I'm really proud to say, Mayor, that we're going to come in at $2.7 billion in total sales this year. What does that mean to a former county manager from medium-sized counties in North Carolina? Well, when I hear the $2.7 billion in sales, what I realize is that represents about $270 million in cost savings to our communities across the nation. The reason being is that our process not only makes your procurement more efficient, it actually saves you on average about 10% in your cost. We did have about 55,000 to 60,000 registered users on U.S. Communities this last year, and that gives you a tremendous amount of power in the marketplace to try to negotiate the best value and least cost for these supplies and services that we do offer you. City sales nationally, as a result of the hard work in this partnership by the Conference of Mayor staff, and I would like to point out Catherine Whalen, Louis Watson, and Jeff Bean, who work on this on a day-by-day basis. We had sales of $400 million to cities this year, and that represents about $40 million in savings. We were also able, because we have such a large mass now of entities that are working with us, to negotiate 7 new supplier contracts. The most notable one is really with Amazon Business Services, and we had sales of about $34 million from that platform since February. And what's exciting about Amazon Business is that's multiplying by about 14% every month. It's growing, 14%. So it's going to be a huge addition to our service line. An example of the power of the 55 to 60,000 entities that procure off this platform is the fact that we've been able to negotiate and form a partnership between U.S. Communities, Premier, and Adapt Pharma on Narcan nasal spray, which I know is of interest to everybody in this room. And because of that relationship and because of our purchasing power, we were able to negotiate, or U.S. Communities was able to negotiate, a 40% discount, and that places it at a $37.50 per dose acquisition for Narcan, which is really a good discount. And really, you know, what price do you put on a life? Knowing that for $37.50 you can overcome an overdose, and that's just fantastic. I hope that that's the one item that we have on our platform that doesn't see too much growth in the future, and hopefully there won't be a need for it, Mayor. But anyway, I just wanted to report out to the group that we've had a fantastic year, looking forward to another fantastic year, and we appreciate the partnership with the Conference of Mayors for making this all work. And with that said, I'll just close by saying domo arigato, y'all. Thank you very much.
Hey, look forward to seeing everyone tonight at the Canadian Embassy for the welcome reception and a late night event across the street at the St. Regis, sponsored by Uber, the American Heart Association, and Comcast. Buses for the welcome reception will begin to leave this hotel at 6:30 p.m. Begin at 6:30 p.m. Thank you all. God bless you.